lovely to see you all here and to see many of you also online, so hi all. And in particular, it's a great pleasure for me to be here for Tim's inaugural. I'm Colm Harmon, I'm Vice Principal Students at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm here for me, but also on behalf of the Principal who's away in the Serengeti or something like that. At least the pictures of lions, tigers, and not bears, but something else but tigers are suggesting that. It's why it's a particular pleasure for me. I mean, you've all got the piece in front of you that says nice things about Tim and tells you all about his biog and who he is and what he's about. But when I came to Edinburgh, it was driven hugely by some incredible colleagues, some of who are here today, that really had, I think, started to map out how we could be sort of futurologists in thinking about how we do education here. And one of the huge privileges of my time here has been meeting Tim, learning from him, and hearing about how he can change what we do as an institution, particularly in the science disciplines. The work that he did in supporting all of you and then all of us, including me, during the pandemic was phenomenal. And as he turns his attention now to other things that we're involved in around curriculum and reform, we're really starting to bring that sort of future teaching, future learning area into focus, and his leadership and others with him will be hugely valuable for that. So on a personal basis, it's a huge pleasure for me, because one of the great pleasures of my time here has been working with you and engaging with you and indeed learning from you. And that's not just because his mum and dad are online, so hi to Perry and Alex Drysdale over in New Zealand, and to Emily, his sister, and Lucy and Bella, his nieces, who are also joining us from New Zealand. And the only other really thing for me to say before I hand over to Tim is, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. You know what you got to do? And with that, I will hand over to Tim Drysdale. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You're welcome. Thank you so much, Colm. What a wonderful introduction, and it's an absolute privilege to be seconded to work in Colm's team for the next year, so we've got some fun stuff coming up. But before we get to that, tonight we're going on an adventure. Tonight we're going to meet some dragons, and this is one of those stories of how we came to be where we are today through the lens of Tolkien. The adventure itself, like most adventures, starts off fairly uncharted. You head off, you think you're having the adventure, and then some way into the adventure actually starts. So a talk like the one tonight is partly a ritual recognition of that passing into the phase of professorship. It's also a celebration. So that means we can have a little bit of fun with it. So you'll notice some buckets at the front here, and we're not collecting for the Fringe Festival. However, you will be being active at some point. So the positions you have chosen in the room will have already created a competitive advantage or disadvantage, and we'll let you move around later on. No adventure would be complete without some decisions that needed to be made. Now, I've sat where you've sat, and I will be sitting in your seats when some people who've been here for far longer than I have do their inaugurals. Apparently, I'm ahead of the curve at doing it only 5 years in. But when I have sat in these seats, the question that I've asked myself is, well, the thing I've been most curious about are, what are the decisions that people made along the way? Particularly when on the one hand there's conventional wisdom, and on the other there's some evidence that suggests that a different path might be the one to take. When the answer isn't in the back of the book, it can get a little bit interesting, and so I thought I might share some of those moments with you this evening. And of course, I promised that every good story has dragons in it, so there will indeed be dragons of 3 types. We will introduce the Drysdalean hypothesis of the triptych of dragons, and forever after we shall understand the world better through the lens that we're applying today. So The dragons that I introduced here are really a bit of a way of getting out of the weeds of the technology and talking about some of the things that come along. You know, the colleagues that I have in the university who are doing engineering, sometimes I have no idea what they're talking about. Quite often I have no idea what they're talking about because the depth of expertise that we have in a place like this. So I thought I'd try and avoid putting you through too much of that tonight, and hence we have the lens that has some dragons in it. Most good adventures start with what you think is the map, but it becomes a lot clearer in hindsight. It's often only when you look back that the path appears straight. This particular adventure began in the Shire of New Zealand in 1977, and sometime later I ended up in Glasgow. Then that's when the first adventure started, and then adventure number 2. So that's approximately the structure of what we'll be going through tonight. This is the idyllic land of my upbringing. It didn't look quite like this, but it certainly felt like it. You know, everything was lovely. I got to ride scooters around fields full of sheep and do all sorts of other silly things that New Zealanders get up to because we only had 2 television channels. I soon got into programming and electronics. My dad was very, very keen that, this was the 80s, that I should learn about computer chips because computer chips were at the heart of computers, and surely that would be the top of the food chain. So if I could master the art of messing around with chips, then indeed a great career would ensue. And I finally met a few years ago the guy that he had tapped on the shoulder at work to wire up a NAND gate and some LEDs and shove them on a bit of breadboard or plywood, which was, I think, a birthday I had just before I went to school. I have no idea what this thing did, but it blinked and it was fun. But you know how I said something about looking back? When I was at primary school, I entered a science fair with my first interactive digital education intervention. Now, I didn't have ethical approval, I didn't do any surveys, and I was far too young to know about publishing. So all I did was lug this giant IBM XT and a huge cathode ray screen, and it was lovely and sort of yellow, and it showed you circles, and you could overlap them and do the Venn diagram thing. I didn't really think much more of that until I was doing my senior fellowship application for the HEA, and I suddenly realized that, you know, reaching back in time, I'd done this digital education thing. It seems less surprising now, but the journey from that point onwards always, you know, takes a few different side roads. There was an excellent university right on my doorstep. Regrettably, that meant I couldn't really get that far away from home, so I was about 3K down the road from my folks at the best university that was available to me in New Zealand. And in an illustration of just how small the world is, we had some amazing staff members there, and I was in one of our professors' very first lectures in New Zealand, Rebecca Chung, and along with her colleague David Cumming, who I came to work with in Glasgow, and my supervisor for my PhD, Richard Blakey, we actually made real chips, and that's what you can see in that picture. That's a picture from the paper they published. And in teams of 2, we made one of the little squares in there, and we sent it off to a chip foundry, and they got out a potato and sort of printed these things because they were absolutely huge by today's standards. But they worked, and it was crazy. You know, genuine engineering and education. But my main interest was in messing around with microcontrollers and making networks of things for a company that was sponsoring me. And then I decided to do a PhD. And at that point, things took a sharp left turn in terms of what I was looking at. We went on to do some great public engagement around this idea of seeing through clothes to find weapons and contraband. But to get there, we first had to solve a bit of a problem. It turns out that our eyes have evolved to use the light that makes it through the atmosphere to Earth. And there's some very clever things you can do if you're a Viking that's trying to get from the place you are to the place where you want to plunder, and it's gone all cloudy. If you're using the sun for navigation, you can grab this thing called calcite or a sunstone, hold it up to the clouds, and rotate it around a bit and get a bit of an idea of where the sun is, i.e. you can see through the clouds to find the sun behind it. We wanted to do the same thing at terahertz frequencies, but calcite doesn't work there. No material does what calcite does in the terahertz regime. So that was problem number 1. Indeed, the first dragon had reared its head. The project took some inspiration from structures found in the eyes of moths. Now, we've all seen cat's eyes. We've all heard the story about cats on the side of the road, and they've got big glowing eyes. If you're a moth, I can just word of advice, don't choose the glowing eyes option when you're choosing your body, because all of the birds will be able to chase you down. So moths actually, for a competitive advantage, have all these lovely structures on their eyes so that the light goes in really well and doesn't bounce off. And that's brilliant if you don't want to get eaten. It also turns out that that same structure can be used to recreate sunstone if we just make it into grooves. And so having spent a lot of time playing around with chips and computers, all of a sudden I was handed this custom blown bit of glassware that you can see on the left of the screen and told to make some silicon wafers turn into things that look like moth eye structures. And that was me splashing chemistry around, which was left turn number 1. And it took a little while to get my head around that one, actually, about a year and a half. And eventually I put my foot down and said, can I have a proper mask, please? And I got shipped off to Wellington to use a PDP 8 or 11 driven mask thing that was in a research institute up there. And all of a sudden, my stuff started working. And I set off on what I thought was an adventure, but really was just a preparation phase. I arrived in Glasgow and suddenly saw 4 lanes on a road for the first time. And I have lots of memories of super sophisticated nights out to bars and silly things happening that, you know, I've been back to, well, I lived in Glasgow for 13 years. There's still a few things I sort of remember that I can't quite place in the city, but it was a pretty magical experience. I spent a month in a basement with Harold, and we did a lot of measurements on a piece of equipment. I think at the time there were only 2 in Europe, whereas pretty much now when I go to conferences, you can do terahertz stuff wherever you go. You'll see a sign on the chair that says Sparky. Due to an unfortunate spate of laundry choices made in New Zealand, walking backwards and forwards in this lab, as I had to do, I had to walk from one end of the bench to turn the measurement on and the other end to adjust it. I had to discharge a spark. So I made 3,000 measurements, I discharged 3,000 sparks and jumped 3,000 times. But the equipment was not harmed, so I was allowed back eventually. But it did give me my first paper. I still remember walking in to start my PhD and thinking, gosh, how do you write a paper? But finally one emerged, and with it, a firm resolve never to make 3,000 spreadsheets and manually process them ever again. David Cumming in Glasgow was then kind enough to rattle Scottish Enterprise for some money and offer me an 18-month contract to invent some telecommunications stuff that would take the world by storm. So I set off to Glasgow about the same time as the dot-com boom set off to the land of bust. And that makes a commercialization project quite an interesting prospect. But we had a great time. We did a lot of great projects over the next 13 years. And a lot of them involved taking equipment and automating it because I wasn't going through that pain again. I also got into networking and learned all sorts of detailed things about the inner workings of computers. And we got donated an IBM P690 from the Greenock Weather Prediction Center. Had a lovely shiny bit of copper in the middle of it. And inside it was a whole 32 gigabytes of RAM, which by today's standards is tiny. But it was a lovely machine, and we learned a lot of really interesting things about how data flies around and how it connects up. And then there were a couple of experiments that required taking some risk, both to equipment that was irreplaceable, should I break it, and that involved heating these micro machines we had made up until they glowed orange. And the number of people I had to talk to and the number of precautions we had to take so that we could do this in this irreplaceable equipment and not ruin everybody else's research careers meant that it took a few months to get through that, but we did it. And then if that wasn't enough, I decided I would then try doing it with high enough powers that if something went wrong, I might end up with some physical damage to the old eyeballs with high power microwave stuff. And I remember a conversation with a mob down south who had supported one of the top academics in the field back when they were alive. And their advice was basically, well, there aren't that many rules about it, just, you know, make sure your eyes aren't in the way. Oh, and by the way, we had this experiment where Vodafone phoned us and said, could you shut your experiment down? You're killing a cell phone tower nearby. So it turned out that it was pretty high risk, but you could manage those risks. And it was a lot of fun trying to heat some stuff in a synchrotron down at Rutherford Appleton Labs and not damage a piece of equipment that was worth, I don't know how many figures, with very, very thin Kit Kat foil, thin tin foil on it, yet we were pumping lots of energy into it. So, you know, it was such good fun, I would have almost paid to gone back and done it as an activity holiday. I won't show you the photos of what we constructed while we were there, but it was great fun. So, at this point, we're reaching the first of the declarations of the types of dragons, the technical dragon. These are the kind of dragons that are your friend when you're an engineer, because it's great fun dealing with the technical dragon. It shows up, it might look a bit dodgy at first, but once you get to know it, you can usually solve the problem and then apply those skills in other ways. Around about this time, 2013, 2014, I was lucky enough to spend a month in Hong Kong. And I'd had a number of conversations with colleagues over the years, done a number of digital education and education-based innovations at University of Glasgow. And I was starting to get the real sense that the internet was going to change things. You know, we've only been doing what we've been doing here for about 500 years, yet the history of education goes back thousands, tens of thousands of years. So while it feels like, and it's an inexorably long time for us, it's even more staggering when we think about the fact that practical work is less than 200 years old. Before that, it was lecture demonstrations. So there's a lot of things that we take for granted that have actually been around for not that long. And with the invention of the internet, it seemed like those ideas might need to come into standard university campuses. So I had a bit of a think about it and realized that the Open University was one of the world leaders in distance education, and maybe it might be worth setting off on a slightly different adventure. But before we get to that, we're now going to have a little bit of a look at one of the other things that was going to come along. So I knew about the internet back then. There are other innovations that usually follow. One innovation begets another, and one of those is AI. And there's some people in the room here who research AI, and all the rest of us now are suddenly aware of it. What I thought might be fun would be for us to actually be some AI. And this is where the buckets come in. So Anna, what I'll get you to do is, while I talk this through, if you could run our data up to the back, and we'll go with the first, if you can run 3 sets to the left and 3 sets to the right. Okie dokie. So, activity time. If we reduce it down, all systems have to have some kind of structure. You know, and as tempting it is to think artificial intelligence is as opaque as our brains are, it's actually just information starts at one end of a network of stuff and it flows through to the other, at which point a decision is made. Perhaps it colors a pixel red, perhaps it colors it green. Perhaps it makes a decision. In our case, we might set a neural network or an artificial intelligence the task of telling a duck from a rabbit. Now, this seems like a fairly trivial thing to do, but it's a useful demonstration. So the way we're going to do it is we're going to send information from one end of a neural network to another, and as it goes through the network, it's going to end up heading toward the decision that makes sense for the thing that is in front of it. And in this case, you'd hope that if we're showing it a duck, that most of the ping pong balls end up in the duck bucket. Obviously, we're human. So to make this a little bit more fun, we're going to divide the room right down this line here. So Chris, you're on that team. Yep, I can already see people shifting up there. Sarah, you're on that team. And what we're going to do is, your job is to get some ping pong balls which are in the paper buckets at the back, all the way down to here. Now, there are a couple of rules, because, you know, things are more fun with rules. Ping pong balls have to come out of those bags, and you can't just run the bag down to the front. But beyond that, those balls need to make their way through the network of people, somehow or other, up to the front and into the correct bucket. And the network that's fastest is obviously the best one, as long as it's got the right answer. So there is a bit of jeopardy at the front here where we might need to throw some things into these buckets. And I don't know, this network here might need a little bit of healing up the front here, unless you're a really good thrower. So feel free to move around. There's no pressure on the people at the front here on this side. Maybe the next row back will have to help. Okay, so what we're going to do, We're going to have a couple of runs at this. We're going to do some training first, because this is how neural networks are handled. We do training first. So this round, we're going to have 2 rounds of training. Then I'm going to talk with you a little bit more, and then we're going to come back for a competition. So we're going to see how long the neural network training lasts when we actually put it into action. Okay, so people at the back who are in the audience, have you got some ping pong balls? I can see the bags. Okay. Are we ready for some activity? On your marks, get set. What is this image? Go! All right, we've got 2 different strategies emerging already. Oh, it's nearly in the bucket. Didn't see a thing. Didn't see a thing.
Safety issues.
That's right, that's why we're not using bricks. Oh, do you know what? I mean, these things all involve evolution. Okay, fantastic. Yeah, good, thanks, son. Hey, woohoo!
Some managing behaviour in this.
Okie dokie. Right, let's assess the quality of the output here. Who got it in the wrong bucket? Ooh, empty. But slightly fuller, because maybe there was a bit of, how should we say, evolution of the physical structure of the neural network to include dumping some stuff in there. Tell you what so what we've learned is that basically all the images I've generated for this talk and a whole lot of the stuff that people are using to generate stuff comes down to throwing information around and hoping it goes in the right bucket. Most of the time it gets somewhere in the right place, sometimes it doesn't. Okay, so we've trained with one image, now we're going to train with another. Now to short circuit this one, Adam, I think what we might do is if you run that up to one side and then that one up to the other, we can just go with that set there. Now believe it or not, when I've done this, and we haven't trained it on both buckets, we get very interesting results. So tonight we are, in fact, going to train with both sets of images. Are there any modifications that anyone would like to make to the structure of the room? We might just move these over here. There we go. If it was an NBA convention, we might have to move them further back. Okay, so we've got some ping pong balls at the back there. That's an example of feed forward. All right, ping pong balls ready at the back? Say yes? Yeah. All right. I see a bag on that side. Have you got a bag there? That bag needs to be on that side over there. Otherwise, we're going. There we go. Oh, that was a great, what's the word? Example of getting an advantage. Okay, on your marks, get set, go. Oh, that shot was really good. Shortest through, shortest through. Looking for extras. Oh, it was close. I think I saw some spin on a shot just there. All right. So we seem to be pretty close to be able to make a decision here. Still interesting. Same performance from both networks. This one still has one in it, and this one doesn't. So already we're developing different characteristics in the different networks we have. Now, we've also given you quite a few balls, so I think statistically speaking, that one might have been a bit of about the same. But you can see there that AI is nothing to be threatened by. Well, okay, there's some things to worry about, but that's just the sound of lots of things changing in the education system. We're going to come back to the competition in a moment, make sure those are the right way around. But before we get there, I thought I'd explain a little bit more about why those things are changing. So, off I set down to Milton Keynes, through the grand forests of Middle England, carrying the digital technology of some papyrus, and strangely, it's AI, so it mixes all sorts of things up. I've got a Gore-Tex backpack on, but I'm carrying ancient paper. Never mind. The OU, it was an interesting experience. I'd spent 13 years in Glasgow, so it was lovely to have hot weather. However, I was inside 7 days a week for 2 years, so I didn't really see a lot of it except going between the car and the lab. And it also snowed, which was quite cute. And there was a cricket pitch, and it kind of reminded me of Christchurch. So there were many lovely things about it. And while I was there was the task of adding an electronics course to the engineering degree. And in the process of that, a team of us made these lovely books here, which I've brought along in case anyone is curious about what happens in an OU textbook. So they'll be around later. They ended up having pictures of the remote labs that we built. And that was a really, really attractive part of the opportunity to go there, was the opportunity to build this remote lab for this course. The OU had already built some remote labs, but they hadn't done, Colm, thank you very much, we'll see you later, but they hadn't done anything for the engineering side yet. So we had lots and lots of stations with these equipment pieces in it, and we needed to stitch them all together and make them accessible really quickly. A lot of the other stuff was telescopes and X-ray diffraction systems, and so 20, 30 seconds delay didn't really matter. You could push a button, and you knew the thing was going to take 10 minutes to do its thing, and it didn't matter if the response didn't come back. But I knew for the engineering lab that this was going to be too slow. So I had one of those decisions to make, which was, do I hedge my bets? Do I carry on keeping the research going and do the remote labs in a way that, you know, we get them done, we keep the funder happy, but maybe we don't get the full benefit of everything? Use remote desktop protocol. And I wasn't sure it was the best punchline to the joke, what did you do with a check for $3 million, to say we use remote desktop protocol to connect to some experiments. So I pitched the idea that we would do this ultra-fast, ultra-low latency technique, and it took about 6 months of conversation to get around to deciding that we would do it. A trip home at Christmas, I thought, do you know what, maybe I see their point, maybe it's too much risk for that institution. So I came back and had a discussion with the team, and I expressed this view, and I flipped basically, and then they flipped. So in about 30 seconds, went, brilliant, thanks, right, we'll do it then. So off we did. And the net result was that I holed up in the lab for a significant amount of time. It became known as the Azores because there was a conference in the Azores that I didn't go to because I realized I needed to stick behind and do some more coding. One of my lab technicians worked at Marshall Amplifier, so there was some hilarious stories from him. I mean, this guy, like, dropping names was just not even part of the vocabulary, just the amount of people he'd met. So I'd always thought Marshall guitars were pretty cool. And then I went into the factory and saw that it was just like the factory that I used to work in Christchurch. So it turns out engineering is pretty much the same across a lot of different fields. At one point, I got so paranoid I printed out all the code I'd written, just in case something went wrong. I think that's just shy of 6 centimeters, so that was pretty good fun. But the net result was we got this thing delivered to a deadline with lots of experiments all running instantaneously. And in a really strange twist, I discovered that a small piece of aluminium, that little piece of red aluminium you can see there, can represent emotion. I know this sounds a little bit touchy-feely for an engineer, but when it started off in my house, they were on a shelf in my living room, and at 7 o'clock every morning for about 2 weeks, my dad would log in, and he was kind of trying to make the thing loop the loop. And he was the only one that would spin it in a particular way, and I could look over in the morning and see it, and it felt like my dad was in the room with me. So I was beginning to get this sense of the way that we can connect at a distance, and foregrounding and valuing that emotional connection with the equipment that partly comes from it being available instantaneously. We won a bunch of awards for it, and the wider activity that we were doing at the time. Some of them were specific to the engineering portion. So it was really good fun having a victory lap, and super enjoyable. You'll see, the usual antics there. The second dragon basically was time and resources. Getting this stuff done, it brought together everything that I'd learned at Glasgow, but it needed to be done super, super short on time. And we had to learn a bunch of things about working in a team, using these new technologies to get that done. And I feel like time and resource dragons are ones you might get familiar with, but they're maybe not as friendly as the technical ones, because technical ones are always welcome, they're always interesting, but time and resources pressure usually just means work. So, right, I hope you've remembered what you learned about your neural networks, and if I could get you to deliver the competition balls. These are very special, totally different to the other ones we've just used. Right, one to each side of the room. And just to raise the stakes, someone in the winning team will be going home with a real dragon. So let's not see any running up to the buckets. Okay. We've got our first adopter of remote labs here at Edinburgh in charge of the ping pong balls up left there, so okie dokie. Get ready to throw those balls down here. So what we're going to do, the winning team is the team that gets all of their balls down here as quickly as possible. Right, they're already moving. Let's go. Go, go, go. What's the image? That one. Figure it out. It's just evolving, it's fine. Okay, we've got different opinions emerging in the two networks here. All right. Oh, it's coming down the wire. Right. Oh. Well, at least on time. Okay, well done, everybody. You have successfully neural networked we're going to learn something about this side of the room. It might be uncomfortable. We're possibly going to learn something about this side of the room too. So, this side of the room went fully for the duck, and this side of the room went fully for the rabbit. So, there's some interesting psychological research around this image. Now, I should preface this by saying I'm not a psychologist, and this is not a diagnosis, and and in this particular instance, I probably don't have your best interests at heart, purely for comedic value. But, hands up, how many people themselves thought this was a duck? How many people thought it was a rabbit? Okay, and how many people thought it was both? Cool. So the good news is that if you think it's both, and you can flick between seeing them quite quickly, you tend to be a bit more creative. If you see it as one and you sit there and hold it, then, well, probably we'll leave that for a session with you and your therapist. Okay, so the team that was fastest to complete and who didn't knock their bucket over, i.e. didn't destroy their own network, was this side of the room. So what we're going to do now is, there's only one dragon and there's quite a few of you, so we're going to move to a time-honored tradition of using some random element. So what we're going to do is we're going to just narrow this down until we run it down to one person. So what I'm going to get you to do is you have to nominate yourself into it, and it's just this side of the room. Sorry, people, you knocked the bucket over. It's game over. It's going to be arms up or no arms. You have to choose a team. You can change your team every round until you're out. And then, well, it's obviously got to be a little bit self-policing. If the person next to you appears to put themselves back in the game, just, you sort them out. Okay, so I'm going to spin this. I'll just give you an idea of how it's going to work. I'm going to spin this. And if the result matches your arm position, you get to stay in. Okay. I'm going to reset the wheel. The tension's rising. The theme music is pounding. This side, put some arms up if you're going to be in the arms team. Okay. Oh. Okay. Everybody who was arms up, was no arms, wasn't it? Everybody who's still in, choose a team. Now you're going to have to split yourselves or follow some strategy. Right, so everyone who's still in, choose a team, arms up or not. Okay. Well, late entry from Michael there. He's got his arms up though. You're good, you're good. Oh, okay. So this wheel seems a bit biased, doesn't it? I promise I didn't introduce this merely to talk about bias in networks. Okay, if you're still in, make a decision on what team you're in. Off we go. Finally, arms up. All right, how many people are still in? Is that just 3 of you? Wow, okay. Okay. So the 3 of you, you've got a really interesting, there's 2 possible outcomes and there's 3 of you. How many more rounds are we going to play? 1 or 2, hopefully. Okay, so remaining people, choose a team. Oh, okay. This is really coming down. So it's going to be Gareth versus Simone. One of you's got to go. If I hear that this has been maltreated after you. Okay, choose a team. You both want to go arms down?
This is just to let you know, it's not going to be the last round.
So, maybe this should be a lesson to the rest of us about the competitiveness of engineers. I'm not bloody losing. Right. Who's going to... Okay, we've got arms up. Oh, Aristides, are you back in, are you?
If they're not making up their mind, I'll make it.
And let that be a lesson to all academics everywhere about funding. Okay, Simone's arms up. Gareth has no arms. Let's see where we get to. Oh! You're welcome. And that's why you're head of school,
Indeed.
because you know how to get stuff. Okay. So, this was me on my way back up from Milton Keynes. Obviously, I took the car rather than the walking, but never mind. This is what it felt like arriving in Edinburgh intellectually. I got dragged into so many amazing conversations by some of the people who are in this room who went, yes, I see that you're an engineer. However, you're doing some stuff that has education in it, so allow me to melt your brain with humanities. Thanks, Anne-Marie. So this sort of grand vista of Edinburgh and the wonderful people in it unfolded before me, and off I went on an adventure, which I had pitched at my interview that I was going to bring remote labs to this small city centre campus to solve some space problems. Little did I know that there was a third type of dragon now about. In the first 2 years I was here, we had some amazing teaching opportunities, took over from Alan Murray, and that was a big pair of shoes to fill with all of the amazing demonstrations that he did. One of the activities we developed was a solar panel thing, where students would make a solar panel that would track the sun. Then a bunch of us around the country got together and said, hey, remote labs are pretty useful. And then the pandemic hit, so we got a little bit distracted. And in order to illustrate one of the changes that we needed to make, I did some stop motion animation, which is not as tedious as it might otherwise seem. So this is how we used to teach. We pile everybody in. Somebody stands at the front. This is how we had to teach during the pandemic. So we put a bunch of equipment in, and then some people arrive and stay distant, and everyone else joins in the cloud. And magically, some iPads appear, who knows why. The point of that was more that while this pandemic change was happening, it was a huge, 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 huge change for us. And it opened the door, I think, to a lot more thinking about what we might do. While that was going on, we had teaching labs that were lying empty. And thanks to a design that my dad had knocked up at Christmas earlier before, we had this wooden box prototype for a remote lab. And I built the first 4 of them in my living room, which fortunately didn't have much furniture in it, so I could spread my tools everywhere. And then during the pandemic, we built 50 of these boxes, which started off in my living room. And that was okay. Then I thought, well, why don't we shift them into the office? So it completely filled my office with 50 boxes. It turned out the fire department were very, very, very unhappy with that. They did say that some academics had way more books than I had wood in my office, but all the same, it looked different, and that wasn't good enough for them. So we shifted it into a classroom, and Aristides, who's at the back, was our very first user, and we used it on his Controls and Instrumentation 3 course. He developed all the coursework for it, and we were able to do practical work during the pandemic. But we also had experiments in classroom 2, and that wasn't going to wash when the students came back. So we had a chat to the fire department, and they said it needs to be metal and it needs to keep all the fumes in. And we made these containers, which we now have spread around 4 different buildings on campus. And Helen, who's here, was instrumental in us getting these placed just out there. So have a look later on when you get there. But the great thing about these is we can stick them in a spot and save around about 150 square meters of teaching space for every square meter of these that we have, which is a pretty significant sum of just estate's cost every year, plus all the cool things we can do. So we were going to have a bit of a play with these if we want. What I will do is if you want to take a picture of that QR code with your phone, that'll give you a link, and you can log in and have a bit of a look at one. So over the last few years, we've built a number of different experiments. We're in 3 of the 4 different disciplines now, and we're building some experiments for the 4th discipline at the moment. So, things have come on a long way. The one that you'll see now is that's available as a spinner. So I think most people have got into that, got that there. So we have lots of these spinners available. We'll just randomly pick one. In fact, actually, we won't pick that one because it's already booked. Look at this. There we go. Oh, I've booked that for 15 minutes' time. This is quite good fun. This is kind of what it was like for the first few students when we came in. Right, let's see who's got this one. 1823. Okay, there we go. All right, so we can have this do some stuff. So a big show of how quickly this happens. 3, 2, 1. I'm going to hit the, well, actually, I'm going to hit the green button when I count down from 3, 2, 1, and you should see that spin wobble a little bit. So 3, 2, 1, smack the button, and you can see straight away it's doing its thing. It's sending all the video and data down to London. It's coming all the way back to us here, even though they're just out there. But that makes life a lot easier for us here on campus. So that is a remote lab, and them being easy to use is kind of a key part of it. So it didn't take long to get in there, doesn't take long to get something done, and the response is instant. There's a huge number of contributors here. There's about 20 people that have directly contributed, and then there's the same again or more who've contributed organizationally, including one of our first supporters, Gareth, and Kahir during his reign of head of school. But this has been a really, really big team effort. Just and even a bunch of people who are not named on here, to all of whom I'm grateful. And this is a picture of some of them. Some of them you may recognize in the audience. If you do, well done to them. And then in a really lovely bit of timing, I set the date for this inaugural, not knowing what would happen next, genuinely. But we won an award literally about 10 days ago. And it was for the digital transformation, of taking a traditional campus and taking a digital technology and bringing those together and then having the people on the campus change the way they work. So there's a cultural transformation element to it. And reflecting on that process, I realized that it changed me as much as my attempts to change the institution. So over the last 5 years, there's been quite a lot going on inside as one learns how these things play out. So we do have a small video here, just a couple of minutes, just to give you a quick flavor. Remote labs are a way of connecting students to equipment in real time using just a web browser. The experiments are here on campus, turning it into a great science museum feel, and for the students, they can explore in their own time. Traditional laboratory timetables are normally really, really strict and they're really, really constrained, whereas with remote labs, it doesn't matter if you've got work commitments or caring commitments because they're on 24/7. Remote labs are highly cost effective because we reduce the amount of floor space we need. We use low value foyer space to replace, for every square meter of foyer space, 150 square meters of teaching lab space, and that's a huge cost saving. The impact that remote laboratories have had on teaching has been huge. We've increased the amount of practical work on our courses by a factor of 10 or 20.
Remote labs means that we can use the same hardware and redesign the user interface and provide that to third-year undergraduates in engineering, for example, whilst using the same hardware with secondary school students by updating and redesigning user interfaces.
The remote labs were created using a variety of innovative processes, including 3D printing, laser cutting, and CNC machining, using widely available materials. We fully design each experiment using CAD software and an iterative process that includes a customer. This minimises waste and increases the speed at which a working prototype can be constructed.
This has been a big project that encompasses teams from the technicians all the way through to the academic staff that work on the courses themselves, with everybody coming together. Remote labs are open source because we believe that everybody should be able to customize their education to suit their own individual circumstances and needs. And we want what we're doing to be able to help other people out and join us and share the benefits that we're already seeing. So, type 3 dragons, the final dragon type, is the cultural dragon. These are actually really nice dragons. But for an engineer, sometimes they're the ones that you didn't get taught about when you were in your undergraduate years. So the process of coming to Edinburgh and taking a project that requires a different way of thinking and a different way of looking at things through to actually being used and then growing it has really been a huge, huge team effort. And for me personally, this is why there's a third dragon type, because that cultural change piece turns out to be super, super interesting. And as a result of some of those thinking processes that we've been through, a whole lot of other great changes that we can see that might be very, very useful to do to help us prepare to take us into the future, all sort of come to mind. And a lot of it for me is to do with what we get from the technology that is sitting there trying to displace perhaps some elements of what we already do. Now, universities are great accumulators of technology. Lectures were originally about being able to get a copy of what was in the one book that existed, so somebody would read it out and you would write down your version. The printing press came along, but we didn't stop lecturing. So the internet's going to come along, and that means that there are a bunch of things that we probably won't stop doing, but we may change the amount that we have them. But one of the things that we do need going forward is this ability to make decisions ourselves about what technology we want to adopt, how we want to adopt it, and to co-develop that technology with the people side, rather than just sitting back and waiting for somebody in an edtech company to produce a product that they can make shiny and sell to us. If we do it from an academic-led standpoint for the things that really matter, that make a key difference, then we can actually get our autonomy back and shape our future in a way that represents the academic values that, that we associate with the type of institution that we work in. So with that, I shall conclude with a fairly obvious piece of advice, which is to go on adventures. And if conventional wisdom says one thing and the evidence suggests to you that maybe a different route might work out, I'd suggest follow the evidence and look for dragons, because they represent opportunity. Thank you very much. Yeah. Do you have a mic? Oh, there's a microphone.
I'm terrible with these. Can you hear me at the back? Yeah, brilliant. Well, Tim, thank you very much. I really didn't anticipate the level of audience participation or the number of balls that were thrown clearly at me. I'm not sure what that says. Anyway, but it was really fantastic. I did notice that your AI picture of you got younger each time. Is there a reason?
I slipped at a fiver.
Anyway, my role now is really to thank Tim and all those who've got on. We're going to have open it up for a few minutes for questions, and then we will head up the back only for the reception. But certainly from my point of view, it was a fantastic one. It was certainly the most interactive. The last one I was at had that much interactivity, involved me literally switching the lights off to represent a blackout, so that was a hell of a lot better. But I would like to thank a number of people other than Tim and his team. Louise Farquharson, who's been putting this together for what seems like millennia. I think, as ever, does a fantastic job. And I think you hopefully hope there is some food at the top. We may change your mind. I think there is. Others involved, I've noticed colleagues from the recruitment team, some student support, and also from the graduate school who've been helping direct people up the stairs into this really quite fantastic theatre. I wish all of our buildings were like this. But thank you all very much for coming. But I think what we'll do now, if we can, is ask if you have any questions for Tim. Go on.
There's more throwing things around if you want.
More throwing.
That was very enjoyable, Tim. Thank you very much. I'm from the Science Festival in Edinburgh. So very interested in the portability of these things. But my question really is, there's obviously many advantages to remote labs. What do you regard as the main disadvantages as far as pedagogy learning?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that as humans we get very familiar with our senses. You know, that psychomotor control, being able to pick something up, being able to smell that something's burning, or to sense that perhaps something isn't running quite right. You know, if you're an engineer, being able to just go into an engineering space and go, yeah, that's not quite right, let's fix that, it's really important. But as we move into the future, There's a whole new set of sensors that we need to have because there's so much engineering and so much science and so much that we do that is remote. So whereas before we might have thought, there's a slight wobble in this ship, maybe the bearing on the propeller is gone, what we might think now is, there's a slight bit of jelly in that camera. Perhaps there is a bearing gone on that system. So there are new things that we're picking up, but we wouldn't be able to do some of the traditional things. So if I actually answer your slide with this one, this is a study that we asked our students to take part in. And it turns out there's a bunch of things that we do in laboratories that aren't just that psychomotor thing of sensing what's going on. It's only one of about 13. And if we look at what's easier, the fancy word proximal just means the one that we're used to. So designing your own experiment, it's a little bit easier if you're in the room because you can walk over to a cupboard and pull something out and stick it on the bench. Actually, how often do we do that in the laboratories that we do now? Quite often we just take something out and we don't have a lot of time for exploration in a traditional lab. So we just say, with this, do that, get it done, and get out again. Because there's that much pressure on us, on our resources. And this is a sector-wide issue. It's not an Edinburgh thing. This is a sector-wide thing that's global. Ruth Graham's report 2018 has comments like this from North American universities in it. So designing your own experiment, there's things we can do about that though. Working with others, well, actually there's things we can do about that too. And actually this survey was done before we used these remote labs in a room with students, with staff together. So they brought in a laptop from an ordinary teaching classroom and worked together. So really the main one is just the multiple sensors piece. That's really the one thing that's actually missing. And as I said before, that's the thing where it's just different. So remote labs complement what we already have. It's that accumulation of technology. So we add them to what we have. I think they could. One of the things about remote labs is about increasing access, and we've all got screens. So something that we can use that ends up on a 2D screen increases access. But if we add haptics or if we add VR, at the moment, that tends to sort of narrow down our access again because of the equipment costs. So yeah, absolutely haptics would be super cool. However, there are sort of access reasons why we might not choose to do that. Alan, I see a smile.
I'm feeling very, very silly with a big fluffy cube in front of me to talk into, but it does seem to work. Two questions, Tim. The first is one for really offline. My son teaches in a secondary school in Fife, and I'd really like to know how we can put them in contact with what you're doing, because I think there are huge possibilities, both for the kids in learning, but also for outreach from us into places where, like Kirkcaldy, where we might not otherwise reach. So I think that's really important. I'd like to talk to you about that afterwards. Main question really was, intrigued by your comment about feeling close to your dad because he was waking you up in the morning swinging a pendulum. Jill and I ran a folk club during lockdown, which you wouldn't think would work, people singing to each other online. But it turned out that we began to actually engage emotionally and personally much more as we got used to it. And I would guess there are things one could do to make things more like a personal experience. Are you aware of any research on ways to do remote experiments, not to form a relationship with your pendulum, but to feel more part of what's going on and feel it's real and increase the reality factor?
I think that we've got an opportunity to actually do some of that research ourselves. A lot of the research we see at the moment is, I needed a remote lab, so I made a one-off remote lab that has a quantity of 1, 2, or 3. And that's a really manageable thing for a lot of people to do. So in the literature at the moment, there's an awful lot of people reinventing that wheel of just doing really small-scale stuff. And as you say, their interesting questions now are digging into what we actually do with this format, and that's where we're taking the research that we're doing here as we build that piece out. We need that evidence for answering the first question of what's this good for, but then that second piece about how do we increase it. Right now I don't have any answers for you, but I think that we know from the literature that if something happens within about a sliding 200 millisecond window, our brains will reorganize cause and effect to make sense of the world. And that's how we get witness bias, or witnesses having different opinions of things, because everybody puts the world together in slightly different ways. There's actually some functional magnetic resonance imaging studies that show that that window might even be as large as 400 or 600 milliseconds. But if you're a gamer, that number's closer to 90 milliseconds. So for our labs, I think we're sitting somewhere between 100 and 200 for most people in good uses. So that first thing is just about making sure that it's happening quick enough that we're not burning any enzymes or glucose in our brain to try and connect the two things together. Once we've got that in place, which we've got in place with our lab, where we go beyond that, that's the open book, that's the interesting question.
Thanks.
Thank you, Tim. That's really very interesting talk, and I would like to protest that the bucket fell on its own, and I only put it upside down. It wasn't my fault.
The referee may have been.
I've been accused about many things from people around here, but seriously, the two things. One is, I suppose, technological. The new virtual reality kind of directions that is happening. I mean, you've seen the new Apple toy that is coming up, which everybody wants one for £3,000, or I mean, Sotos doesn't. But so this kind of direction of technologies will enhance the experience. And the other question is nothing to do with expensive toys, is how this can empower and help people who are a lot more disadvantaged from us who have access to these technologies. So going in the world in places that actually have no facilities and try to support that. What is the trajectory to do that, or can we do that?
So I'll start with the first question first and move to the second one. So VR is super cool. I always have a lot of fun with it, although it has made me feel pretty ill at times. There's a little running dish thing you can get in, and I remember trying it at a conference when I may have stayed up a bit late the night before, and it didn't take long to feel pretty awful. And some of that was down to the delay between what I was doing and how that was affecting my navigation around the room. But that's probably one of the issues I see with VR at the moment, is that it's still early days, and if you want to do VR, and we wanted to do it at a university, we would need to buy the equipment, and then we would need to mask off an area for that person to move around in, and then we would need to pay for the people to stand around and support that. And it turns out that you're going to need an extremely large amount of space and a huge salary budget to deliver a significant increase in the amount of experiential learning you could give those students. So at the moment, there's still an awful lot we can learn in the 2D format that will stand us in really good stead for doing good education in a 3D format, including knowing really well how to partition into the proximal space, the remote space, and then that VR and haptic space. So for now, I think it's great that people are researching VR, but it would require us to buy a significant chunk of land if we were to do it. Willing to take cash, though. The second question was about access to practical work. It's a matter really, really close to my heart, that the Global South has an insane amount of ambition, same as everywhere else. We all want to do really good stuff. Getting access to equipment is one of those factors that can enhance your opportunities. So if we can make equipment available online and somebody from anywhere else in the world could access it, that's a fabulous thing to do. So it's on our roadmap, it's on our to-do list. I've been talking about it, and in multiple places, you know, the drive to do it seems to be there. So it's one that we're really keen to do, you know, locally as well. In fact, we were having a discussion, David and I, with Francesca and Katie yesterday, Alan, about secondary schools. So we will definitely be able to do something there. And going further afield, absolutely yes. I think Sotos was very patiently had his hand up since the very first moment. So.
I've been given the microphone.
You two can duke it out.
With one of the questions I had was just, it's a really long time since I was last in a lab at this university in a teaching context or learning context. How much of the experiments that you've got running in the virtual labs, how different are they from what was already there? And have there been opportunities, or are there upcoming opportunities to do something new beyond the sort of obvious benefits that you've shown?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. David, who's sitting in the second row back there, and I were at a conference literally last week with one of our collaborators from the University of Sydney, David Lowe, and his entire talk was on that very question of, well, now that we have technology, what else should we be doing? So for cultural reasons or political reasons, the experiments we're doing now are there to address pressing problems that we have with capacity. So they're much closer to what we've done in the past. But now that we're building that understanding of how these things work, it's that thing of moving very, very slowly, a step at a time. It's now the time that we can start asking what different things will we do. And there always are some differences. And I think one of the biggest ones is that when we split practical work into proximal and remote, when you start thinking about the remote, you need to unpack a little bit what it is you're actually aiming to teach, be more aware and thoughtful and mindful of those, and sometimes consider splitting those intended learning outcomes up into separate activities. So there's a different kind of sort of a literacy or an awareness of what it is that you're aiming to teach, because we're trying to put back in some of the things we used to get structurally from the way that laboratories used to run when we had much smaller numbers, which we've sort of lost with the scaling in physical space. So, yep, I look forward to some discussions around some fanciful and interesting things we can do. Sotos, yeah, far away.
Tim, I'm an admirer of all of these things. And I think I have a difficult question in that how does these things can scale up? Mm-hmm. So, and how would you induce a sense of excitement when things go wrong? Mm-hmm. And I'm very good at breaking things. So,
join the team.
Do you envision, first of all, that there will be, let's say, activities that the students do that can help build a remote lab for some other students? Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Do you see that, is there a limit to this type of labs? Will we be able to do chemistry labs ever or biology labs? What technology will we need, like microfluidics? Mm-hmm. What limitations there are? And I think the third question I had is, and it aligns a little bit with Alan's point, is how does this fact of multiple senses, maybe it means excitement because things can go wrong. Mm-hmm. So just wanted to touch about on the affective aspect of of a remote lab.
Fantastic. Yeah, so let's take those in a random order, starting with the excitement in breaking things and can things go wrong. One of the experiences I still remember from the Open University lab days was talking to a technician who had come in from working in the Antarctic, where they built equipment that had to work every time under all conditions, and the user was kept safely in a parameter space that meant the equipment would work. I mean, you don't want something going wrong when you're going to lose fingers if you have to take your gloves off to fix something. So this person and I had an amazing conversation about building a remote lab experiment. I said, yeah, I need you to put in a tunable element that makes this circuit stop working. I need you to put in this other thing over here which makes this break. And so we can kind of, you can imagine the full parameter space includes things catching on fire and going bang. Now that's kind of fun. But in a normal, everyday laboratory, we try and keep the amount of incidences of involuntary rapid disassembly, the outbreak of, fire and other such things. We try and keep that down. But for economic reasons, we tend not to try and break stuff. So if we then think about what's left, we've got all of the educational booby traps, all of the things that are surprising, all of the things that don't go the way that you think they would, all of the things that actually fail. And that's one of the advantages of moving online, is that we give people time to be put in a position where they can explore something that's off that menu. A lot of laboratories in courses where there's a limited lab time just go, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, and then go out your bag and get out. And when you've got that little limited amount of time, it's not fair to say to a student, I'm not going to tell you what to do, you need to discover it, because they're not all going to discover it as quickly as possible, and then they're not going to miss out on the thing that they need to get some marks. And that whole system has kind of led us down this line of thinking about things in a very specific way. So if we zoom back out and take your inspiration, the idea with these is that we build in as many educational booby traps, all the blind alleys, all the things that you need to know about. And that then gives us that opportunity to address some of those issues. Now, what else was on your list? Oh, biology, yes, good. Right, so Sergio, just sitting next to David there, is currently a PhD researcher who's working on 3 different chemical engineering experiments with the rest of our team. So we're going to do some titration. Danny is Sergio's supervisor, and so obviously, my knowledge of chemical engineering is fairly limited, so that's why we've got people who know about it in the team working on it. So we're going to do a titration, we're going to do a single tube condenser, and we're going to do a refrigeration unit. So because we've started off with the stuff that makes sense to us, which is the electronics and mechanics, we build trust, now we can start dealing with some squirrely stuff like fluids that can go everywhere and cause problems. And the general principle is, redesign the equipment so you don't need a humanoid robot to operate it. Just use technologies that can do the job that you need. Victoria, fire away.
So my question is about the cultural plan.
Yep. I'm not sure if the microphone was fully on. So the question was around, having broken that taboo of doing STEM practical work online, what kind of processes did we need to go through to work with people around that cultural change? How do we deal with resistance? Victoria put the question far more eloquently than I've just summarized it. It's a super interesting question, and it was one that I discovered what the look meant in this process. And there's a look. You tell somebody an idea and they look at you, and they don't say much with that look. But you get the impression that they've realized that maybe there's something going on here that could be good. So they wouldn't want to dismiss it in case they're on the wrong team when it comes through. But they don't understand it enough to be supportive of it. And I totally get that. I remember when the iPhone came out, it was released in the States. I went in and picked one up in a store and I just thought, this touching glass is horrible. I don't want a phone like that. And then about 3 months later, it was released in the UK. And in that interim period, I'd suddenly realized I was just beginning to imagine what it would be like to have this beautiful slab of aluminum and glass and start to actually enjoy that process of using that interface. And before you know it, I was queuing up outside a store on Byers Road to get one the first time they were released in the UK. So I went from being anti the technology to enjoying it. And that's the journey that a lot of my colleagues have been on with this. And I was giving a keynote talk at an online conference in this engineering education space, maybe only a month or two ago. And a colleague of mine at the OU also gave a presentation about a remote lab they had just done. And at the end of it, they said, when Tim was doing his remote labs, I thought they were dumb. Didn't like them, didn't understand them, didn't want them, didn't think they were necessary, didn't think they were useful. And that was someone working at the Open University. And then they did one. And they said, now I think they're wonderful. So that's a fairly extreme example because they had to create one to find that. But pretty much every time we can get a remote lab in front of somebody and get them engaged with it, at some point, we can fill in that gap. It's hard work having to use your imagination to try and understand all the ideas that are coming at you. I don't think anybody is entitled to say, here is my idea, and have people just understand it. I think there's a fair bit of work you need to do there. And it's in finding ways to do that work and to do it effectively for people that the solution seems to have come. So that's the sort of process we've been on. People see what's going on somewhere and get a bit of an idea about it, and then eventually they'll approach us and say, hey, I was a tutor and demonstrator on this course, I've now got some ideas, could we do this? So it's a much slower process than I anticipated, but you and Anne-Marie warned me that life might be like that.
We've got time for one last question. Philippe, did you have a question? No?
It was the same.
If this is the last question, that's brilliant. I want to be completely self-indulgent, Tim. When I met you in 2018, you came in and pitched to Victoria and myself and a few others in information services where I worked at the time. And you showed us what you'd done at the Open University. And I could see how much work was in it. And I asked you one question in that meeting. I asked you, did you make it open source so that you could reuse it? And you said no. you hinted at this in the video you showed us here, and you've talked a lot about how you've been able to iterate and build on it. So I'm going to ask you that question one more time. Did you make this one open source?
Yeah, this one's open. Yeah, this one's open source, funnily enough. And the reason for that is that education is different in every location that it's done. You know, we do the same experiments at other universities, but we couch them in different places, and that's even within the same Northern Hemisphere territory. I'm aware of Gareth's body language saying it's time, so I won't rabbit on too long. But long story short, what I'd really like to see in future is a community of people who are doing academic-led digital education and not having to reinvent the wheel every time, which is what we're seeing a lot of at the moment. So the effort's going into reinventing the wheel and not answering the questions that Alan's asking about how do we do the emotional engagement, or asking questions about how do we do the fancy haptics, or how do we do the educational booby traps. So by making it open source, I'm hoping that we can stop reinventing this wheel and start focusing as a community much more effectively on all of the really interesting questions that we've still got to answer.
Right, I think we should draw that to a close. There's a free ball for everybody, I think. Or at
Maybe
least,
two.
Or at least what I'd like to do is have a look under your seats and make sure there are no stray ones sitting there. But Tim, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed that. I know the colleagues have, and they're all probably knackered and very thirsty. And I hear you're buying a drink at the top, are you?
Yeah, apparently that's how it works.
Thank you all very much for coming along. Thank you online. I hope that was worth you getting out of bed for. I'm sure it was. I'd like to thank Tim for his excellent lecture.